There's two things that all stutters agree with or share in a commonality. And that is, one is fear, which I have referenced before. So I won't go into that subject. The second one is prayer. If you stutter, you're going to be praying. Unless you just are a total atheist, you're going to be praying. And thus was my case. Now, I've been accused where somehow the Lord singled me out and I was blessed to an infinite degree of being able to speak, eventually stutter-free. I don't believe that's the truth by any means. I believe this. Of course, we all prayed that we could somehow get beyond our impediment. For example, if I had a certain important meeting, for example, I would pray before that meeting that I wouldn't stutter. But as I grew up, I always did. So the prayers, I felt, weren't answered. Now, when I left BYU stuttering class, I really started to pray, but my prayers changed. Rather than to pray that I would be able to speak without stuttering, I disbanded that, knowing full well from history it would not work. What I prayed for was somehow that the Lord would intervene sufficiently that I would end up in a location with a teacher or an environment that would show me how I could deal with speech blocks and not stutter because of those speech blocks. I would know what to do when I had a speech block. But I did make it very clear. I'm prepared to whatever I've got to do in practice, whatever it might be, whatever work, obstacles that I might encounter, that I could deal with those on my own because I became convinced that the Lord would not live my life for me. Somewhere along the line, I had to assume the responsibility. Now, I also believe this, that when I went to the school and I observed, now there's 4 students. We all came from different backgrounds. We all came from different churches. We were different sizes. We were different ages, different parts of the country. We were different, but we shared that commonality of fear, and we shared that commonality that in our hearts, or however, we were praying for deliverance from this impediment. Now, I believe here is the great truism, and that is everyone on this earth, regardless of their religion, regardless of what, that everyone looks upward in time of need, with exception of a few, to their God. Whether it's Allah, whatever it might be, they look for their God. But there's only one God. And that God, because the Scriptures teach, the Christian Scriptures teach us that we are all sons and daughters of Christ or of God in varying degrees. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that this is outlined in John chapter 1, verse 9. That was the true light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. That God loves us all, and we all have this light. This light is the power within us and gives us that something extra that without we could not exist. But with that, we can overcome, we can conquer. So here we are, the 4 students. We're all doing our best. And God loves us alike. I happen to be a Mormon. There was a Catholic there and a couple of Protestants. He loved us all. There was no differentiation. He loved us all. And we all had that true light, that certain something. Now, I've come to the conclusion, I think I mentioned this last time, that we all have a physical body, but we also all have a spirit body, and that the brain is physical and that the mind is spirit. But in order to make it work, it takes that true light that enlighteneth it. And with that, then we can all function. And regardless of our religion or background or whatever, that remains true. So he's going to help those other stutterers just as much as he's going to help me. I really believe that. So now I start off. Did the Lord live my life for me? No. But the point was this, that I prayed that I could find myself in an environment where I could be taught how to speak stutter-free. And that's what I found at the Bogue Institute. The teaching, a blind lady, a beautiful lady, teaching us all. And it was a glorious experience. And it made me appreciate everyone, regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of color. It made no difference. There's that strong commonality. Well, with that, I wanted to bring that out. That God didn't intervene and give me stutter-free speech. It did not work that way. I had to go through the process, just like everyone else in that grouping of 4, go through the exercises and go through what was required. And I reached a point, my gosh, I am speaking without stuttering. And I got thinking, I just can't believe how easy it is, how simple it was, for all of a sudden, I'm able to speak stutter-free without hardly any effort. All I got to do is just swing my arm, follow the instructions of the teacher, and I was speaking stutter-free. And I got, oh gosh, I can go back. I've got this in the bag. But something happened. After about 2 months, when I went to swing my arm, and it didn't work. I found myself in a relapse, and where I started again to experience a speech block. This shattered me. I couldn't believe this. And now it wasn't every time I swing it, or would swing it, I should say, but nevertheless, it didn't work. And I was befuddled by that. Well, the teacher interfered and said, now, Douglas, just pause, take a deep breath of air, and start over again. So I did that, and everything was fine. Now, a few days later, bango, again. This time it seemed to be a little more deeper and a little more interventionist into me. Now that really worried me. And finally, I reached a point where I was forced to my knees in a different manner than ever before. Oh, I'd prayed, but this was different. This is where I reached to the depths of my soul. I have to have help. Direct me and guide me. What should I do? And it came very strong to me. And it was very simple. And whether it was a voice, I can't exactly say, but it was definite and it was, let's say, outspoken within me. I think it was spirit to spirit, that my spirit mind heard. And through the mechanism of the Spirit, that was the true light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. Through that vehicle, I heard, go to church. So, the subsequent Sunday, I called a cab. On that phone, I was going just like this. The cab came, cab showed up, and I had found the address of the church, and we went to the church. Well, it was closed, and it was raining. There was a sign out front, and the sign gave the name of the branch president of the church and his address. So I told the cab to go to the address on the sign. He did. By the time we reached the house, which was quite a ways away, I'd say it was around 7 o'clock, maybe 7:30, something like that. And boy, was it raining. And it was black. Wintertime. A knock on the door, and a big man came. Tall, just a very muscular guy. And he was the branch president. So we go through the introductions, how that went, was that he looked at me, and I raised my arm, and I said that my name, I'm going extra fast here, is Douglas Snarr. I'm from Idaho. I'm going to a stuttering school. May I come in? Very slow, not much slower than this, obviously. His daughter was right there standing at his side. And she turned, and she peeled off and ran down the hall screaming, "Mother, mother, come quickly. There's a crazy man outside talking with his arm." And the Lawrence family, Wilbur and Hope Lawrence, invited me into their house. Oh, did it feel good. And I told them that I cannot talk any faster. I have to speak each word syllable by syllable, a couple of seconds per syllable, to be patient with me. There's nothing else I can do about it. Were they ever curious? They wanted to know everything. Of course, it took so long to say something, but nevertheless, they wanted to know. And we were talking clear until, let's say, wee hours in the morning. And they said, "Well, why don't you just stay with us tonight?" I says, "No, I've got to go back home to the apartment. I can't show any preferential treatment. I think I should remain as part of the group." He said, "Oh, we would like you to stay with us. We could drive you to wherever you got to go each morning." "Nope, I've got to stay with the group. I can't indicate that I have I'm superior in any way to them because I have a better place to stay." They understood, and so it was. Well, we would meet on the weekends, and which would be Saturday and Sunday. One Saturday, this was after about, I'd say, the third or fourth week, they said, "Now, we're both from southern Indiana. We're going to go, we're both from the same town. We're going to go down there. We want you to go with us. Would you go with us? I said yes. The thing that amazed me in that drive down was I'm from the West. Sagebrush, light blue color, trees, a lot of that their leaves would drop. These hardwood trees in Indiana, the colors and the brightness, the oranges, the yellows, the reds, all those colors was simply fantastic. And I was just amazed by that. Well, got to meet both parents. But I stayed with her mother. And while at her mother's house, they explained how we got together and how I talked with my arm and everything. And all of a sudden, she jumped up and she ran to the phone and she called the branch president. She said, I have someone here in my house. He's from Idaho Falls, Idaho, and he talks with his arm. Can he give a 2.5-minute talk in Sunday school? And the branch president concurred. So now I'm on. She didn't even ask me. She just did that unilaterally. Well, I've never done that before. I had blessed the sacrament once, and only once. I'll never go through that again. And put everyone at such unease, trying to wait for me to get the words out. So that night was one of the hardest nights of my life. I broke out in a sweat, and I just couldn't stop sweating. And so next thing you know, the bed was damp, and that's kind of wettish on account of me. And I just kept wondering, how am I going to do this? On the other hand, but the morning came. Next thing you know, we're in church. Brother Lawrence gets up. He explains to them how I came to his house, how I introduced myself with my arm. He demonstrated the use of the arm so they wouldn't be caught by surprise. And then he turned the time over to me. Now, when I walked up to that podium and the microphone, it was, by the way, a very small branch, just a small room, basically. But I would say there were probably right around 75 people there, something like that. And I didn't know quite how to start off. And I didn't know quite what to do, because my right arm is going to have to be used for swinging, but I felt like I got to have both arms and hands to hold myself. I was so weak in the knees, and I felt really weak-kneed. But on the other hand, I just going to hold on for dear life with the left and let the right do the work. I took a deep breath of air, took that initial pause, started the swing. As I went through that swing, I felt an intensification, I believe, of that was the true light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. And as I ended that first swing, I knew that I could drop my arm. And I knew I could speak out. I could speak out like I've always dreamed of and hoped for and wished for and prayed for. And so I did. And I spoke out. I can't remember all that I said. It's been so many years ago. But I remember this much, that I felt a strong urge of a payback. And that payback consisted of me saying and vowing to them that I was going to go on a mission and I was going to do my best. Now, when I sat down, I was where I was before I stood up. I knew that I still have to use my arm. I was not cured by any means. But what I knew, which was perhaps the most important of all, that there was a God, for I felt that influence most powerfully, and never as powerful in any time prior to. And I knew that if somehow I could get myself in sync and have my life compatible with Him, that I could speak stutter-free. But I also knew I still had to go through the process of learning how to speak stutter-free. And if you recall last time, I likened it unto two pillars. One pillar is where we start off and we start to stutter. And then as we speak and we add stuttering upon stuttering, and we build our speech habit, which is a stutter speech habit on the one pillar. And then I quoted from Isaiah 28, that for precept upon precept, for precept upon precept twice, line upon line, line upon line, twice. Here a little and there a little. For with stammering lips and another tongue will I speak to this people. And I explained that in this case, the stammering lips referenced Moses. Moses was a stammerer. Now we had to have help from Aaron. Aaron became another tongue. But scriptures, as well as words have denotations, but they have connotations. Words can be used in many contexts. In this case, the another tongue, and that becomes key, that what we're talking about here at the Bogue Institute, in which I was to learn, was that we're going to start all over again with another tongue. And that another tongue will be building a stutter-free speech habit. Now, to explain this more fully for you, you can understand, is this. I happen to be a member of the British Stammering Association. And the British Stammering Association sends out a magazine every quarter, just a little tiny magazine. But all these stories of all stutters, and that their membership is extensive, extends clear into Germany, extends in other countries in Europe. It's an amazing membership. It extends to Salt Lake City with me, for example. Now, an article came out, and I don't believe I mentioned this, to my knowledge, written by a scientist. And that article was this: is a stutter's brain different than a non-stutter's brain? And so he had 6 photographs, 2 corresponding photographs of a portion of the brain, and then of a stutter's brain and a non-stutter's brain, and then 2 more and 2 more. When he got into the speech center of the brain, which is toward the back and on the side, a stutter's brain is absolutely different. It's more like spaghetti-dized, spaghetti, where the non-stutter's brain is more is normal. Well, as soon as I saw that, I knew that was true. And so I got on the phone, I phoned London, got his name, with his phone number. He lived in Luxembourg, called him. Came to the phone. I've read your article. It's true. A stutter's brain, I know, is different than a non-stutter's brain. Why is it different? And then he spoke. He stuttered on every single word, it seemed to me. It was painful to listen to him. But he said this, that in order to determine why it's different, a stutter's brain from a non-stutter's brain would take many, many years of science. I answered, I don't have to have many, many years of science. I already know why it's different. I know that. So I don't need the many, many years. And then I told him my story, briefly. We had 3 conversations. And the third conversation, he then said to me, Mr. Snarr, there's a man in California who I believe is the most knowledgeable man in the world on stuttering. I would like you to meet him. I have met him. He is of the University of California, Irvine, in charge of their stuttering program. I flew there and I spent 2 weeks with him. Can I call him? And I said yes. Now, I won't go any further into the story right now of that, but he called me, and that brought us together, and I'm going to go back now. And so what we're talking about here is this second pillar. And the idea is that it is possible to take and to recreate a new stutter-free speech center in your brain and a new stutter-free speech habit in your utterance. I know that is true. Now, the technique of bringing that about begins with when I went to the school in Indianapolis. We started off with 10 days of total silence. No speech, no grunting, no talking, no sounds of any kind. A 10-day period of silence. Now that, to me, made a lot of sense. First off, I felt emancipated because I never felt any pressure to speak. For the first time, my gosh, in my life, I'm not going to stutter because I'm not going to speak. I don't have to speak. And so that 10 days allowed to clean the slate. And so with that, when the whole speaking started, then you're starting from a clean slate. And then you learn to say the first sound. And then you build success upon success, all with the use of your arm. Now, the arm does 2 things. It establishes a rhythm, but it brings into the matrix of the utterance the totality of one's body. It's not just the brain working. It's not just the speak organism working and the apparatus there too. It's the entire body is in that process of utterance. And it also, I learned later, which I did develop myself, is that you start to shift. As you go like this, then you shift onto the left leg. As you bring back, then you shift over onto the right leg. So what you do is that you transfer the weight from one to the other so that you get the entire body into the whole matrix of utterance. Everything is working. Everything. The brain, the mind, the whole thing. Spirit body, physical body, a totality of all is working, including that was the true light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. It is intensified in that process, regardless of your background, regardless. If the effort is righteous, it's for a good cause, it's for your own individual betterment, then you're going to get help. regardless. And I saw that. Now, there was one person of the four who was female. She was there when I started, and 4 months later, she was still there. Now, she didn't progress like the rest of us. For example, we had 2 additional people show up. Interesting, they both came from Canada. One was a member of the Canadian Royal Air Force. He wore his uniform every day. And he went 2 months. He says, I got it. I've got it. And I thought to myself, I hope you do. But he said, I don't need to go any further. I got it. And so he left. So you leave based upon when you feel like that you got it and that you're ready to face the world with your speech utterance. But Frances was her name. Well, the teacher was blind. And I think that was a certain limitation. But I observed one thing with her that intrigued me, and that is this. Very subtle. But you know, life is subtle. It can be very, very subtle indeed. And it can swing on a very, very, very fine point and make a huge difference. And she started her swing. She'd bring the 3 together, bring the forefinger and the thumb together like this, and then start the swing. I said, that's not right. But I didn't dare say anything. It's like this. Then as you start the swing, then you bring it together. So in other words, you flow into the sound. You don't start from a dead start. You bring it in like that, and then it's a soft, slow utterance, and then you increase the velocity as you go through the swing, depending upon the particular syllable. Now that's subtle, but I could see that when she went like this and then started, she would jam. Not all the time, but periodically. Jam up. Bang, like that. Now, in my case, why did I have my relapse? In looking back, it's obvious to me that the scriptures teach that sometimes the Lord forces one to be humble. An example of that is Paul on the road to Damascus. And he was a Pharisee. He fought the whole effort of Christianity at that time. Well, the Lord knew what he was and needed him. And so Paul needed to be humbled. And we know what happened on the road to Damascus. The divine intervention, he got knocked flat. He was even blinded. And then he was told where to go. So he had to go through that to finally realize that there was a power beyond his power. And that power was the truth. And it was in that process that he gained this great testimony of Jesus Christ. In my case, I had to be knocked flat. And it was go to church. And when I went to church and experienced the miracle in southern Indiana, from that time forward, I didn't have a relapse while at the Bogue Institute. Now, I had certain relapses periodically as I went through the process after I came home. And what brought about the relapses, I'm convinced, was going from this pillar right here, of this is how you speak, to shift everything over into the new pillar, where the new speech center is, the new stutter-free speech habit. Sometimes you flip back and forth. After all, the first one is extremely well established. You've been speaking this way for years and years and years and reinforcing itself all along with every time you stuttered. So now this one has to be developed. So tendency once in a while would be to flip back and forth. And every time that I'd have a relapse, I knew darn well I'd flipped because I'd lost focus. I wasn't quite conscious enough. I use the word deliberate. My speech initially had to be very deliberate. Now, as I progressed and reached towards about the 4th month, and I was doing very, very well, I realized that I had to have a transition between the school and then going home. And that transition was, I take my right hand and I put it in my pocket. And what I would do is I go through it just like this, and then I'd swing my finger back and forth in my pocket. And swinging that finger would put in play the totality of my body, and I was able to speak stutter-free. Now, that wasn't taught at the school, by the way. This was just me practicing. It made sense to me that there's got to be a step in between the school and then when you go home. And that step is using the finger. There were times I probably used the finger clear up until I was in my 30s, early 30s. But not often. Just once in a while, I knew that I guess kind of needed that little bit of additional help, and I'd use it maybe just for 2 or 3 syllables or a word or two, whatever it might be, then I was just fine. Kind of like a warm-up, an immediate warm-up. Like a basketball player going out there, got to make that 3-shotter or that 3-pointer, got to have to hit 1 or 2 in the practice field to get the feel, and then you're all right after that. What I'm trying to say is that it's just, there is a period. It's a process. Life's a process. You have to be patient with yourself. It's like Kipling said, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting. So we go through the waiting period, the process. And I went through that process. And while I'm on the subject, very few people ever knew, once I got going, that I ever stuttered. And it got to be where, I'd go maybe a year and not have a speech block. And it was quite a wonderful thing. But the fear was different. The fear, not in its intensity, it would back off and become less and less, but it was there. And it was there until I was 43 years of age. And I'll tell you about that story later on, what I went through to finally eliminate that fear from my soul. So it's very gripping. Stuttering fear is a very powerful phenomenon. And of all the fears that I've had in my life, nothing even comes close. It's unique in its own quality. It's unlike anything else. And it's hard to explain. I maintain that no one knows what a stutterer experiences unless they have stuttered themselves. And that's one of the reasons why that the stuttering programs throughout the world in most clinics and universities are not successful in teaching the stutterer how to overcome stuttering is because the teachers themselves have done their best. They've been reading and everything else, but they never experienced the stuttering beforehand. So they can't quite put themselves into the shoes of a stutterer. And therefore, the therapy that they teach or try to teach is not complete and total because it does not meet the full panorama of stuttering needs. And one thing is to feel like a stutterer feels because of his fear. Well, the family, Wilbur and Hope Lawrence, you can well imagine how I feel about them. I went to church. They introduced me. They told the people the truth about me. I was asked to, give a little talk. I did. I was accepted. Yes, I used my arm, but I had the miracle. And I knew with the miracle, time was on my side, and eventually I would evolve into where I wouldn't need to use my arm. Just my finger. I did with my finger. And then from that point on, why, it was just wonderful. Going home was a painful thing to say goodbye. I guess Indianapolis is perhaps about as important to me as any city in the world, next to my own hometown of Idaho Falls, because my life changed so drastically being in Indianapolis and the Bogue Institute. I like to make this comment. I never forgot what Bogue taught. They never gave us a piece of paper. We just started, after we went through the silence, we start right off, taking our turn, speaking. Morning, once. Afternoon, once. Learning from each other, encouraging each other. Now I say goodbye, and I'm coming home. And I'm going to go to BYU, because I love that school. I love that art teacher. I loved those religion classes. I loved what it was doing for me. I never went back to the speech program. I didn't have to. I was way on my way and far advanced beyond them. They were trying, but their knowledge was limited. But mine was more complete. And it was complete with a man who never had any certificates, no diplomas, never graduated from school, college. He learned from his own experience. That's not unusual. Steve Jobs, who changed the world, he had no schooling, and except for one class, during his freshman year, he never even hardly attended school, the university. He didn't care about it. He just couldn't. He just couldn't fit it in with his own mind, his own makeup. It didn't ring true to him for what he wanted to do and what he felt that he had to do. But only he himself knew what that was, and he even didn't know for sure. But he did go to Reed College. Teachers in the second year said, "Come to my class, art class." And one thing changed Steve Jobs more than anything else was Spencerian script. One alphabet, beautiful thing. And out of that came all these beautiful creations, and they had to have his design. He was a fanatic, and it all stems back from Spencerian script. So it's amazing how a tipping point can be so simple and yet could have such a dramatic effect. And when I think about today, that the capitalization of Apple Corporation is bigger than the gross national product of all of Russia. One company, one American company, Apple, bigger. So it's just remarkable. Well, I go back. I mentioned earlier that Carol and I broke up during that summer to get the money to go in the first place. Now I came back. I go to BYU. I don't know where she is, but I still have this feeling for her, as strong as ever. But I guess it was just false pride. I was not going to call her. I was not going to do it. And fortunately, she had more sense than me. She transferred from Utah State at beginning of the sophomore year to BYU. And she stayed with a couple of kids, girls from Idaho Falls High School. So they all knew each other. Well, I get my old job back. My old job was washing dishes in the campus dorm, which is 100% female. And I'm washing dishes. Well, I loved to do that because girls, so many of them wouldn't eat the food. So the food would come back just without even a bite taken. And I was able to take my own little fork. I could eat with certain times food that they didn't eat. And so I was able to turn that job into a way to pay for my food by just eating what they didn't eat. Well, I saw this one girl, and I found out she was kind of the talk of the freshman class. And now that I can talk and with my finger in my pocket, I asked her for a date, and she concurred. Well, then the next weekend I asked her for a second date, and she concurred. Unbeknownst to me, she had called her father in Kansas City and says, "I think I found my husband." And so on the third date, what happened, when I finished that date, and I went back to my little apartment, and now we had 4 kids from Idaho Falls, and I was the 4th one. 2 big beds, put pillows in between us so it wasn't two per bed, in other words. And as I entered into the house about midnight, flipped the light on, and there was Carol sitting in the one chair in the little front room. And I was stunned by that. But deep down, I was extremely well pleased. And she stood, walked up to me, and said, "You either give me your pen, your Val Harry pen, tomorrow by 12 o'clock, or I'll never, ever talk to you again." And walked out of the house. Wow. And my roommates, they all had their ears up to the door where they could hear what was going on. Well, she was gone. I mean, I didn't say a word, just bang. She said it, out the door she went. Well, what happened was, the date that I had, called her parents and told them that she had found her husband. She was a very aggressive girl, obviously. Well, they flew to Salt Lake, drove down to down to Provo, and wanted to meet me. So that next day, I give Carol the pin at 12, but then I had another date with her at 2 o'clock to meet her parents. And I'd agreed to do that. Now I'm pinned to Carol. Now I got to meet her parents, the other girl. Well, and they came on strong. Real strong. Didn't know what to do about that, except my decision was made. I was not going to budge. Following the introductions, then I sit down with her and I tell her that this is the last time that I'll ever be seeing you again. And, no more dates. That I'm engaged to Carol. You can't have it both ways in life. You can't, we talked about last week, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have it both ways. Sometimes you just make a decision, and that's it. I made that decision. Now, when I got back, I go to the first Valhyric meeting. My roommate, Ronald Devon Five, is now the president of the social unit. So he gets up there in front of everybody, and he says, Doug Snarr is back. He has spent this last quarter back in Indianapolis going to a stuttering school to learn how to speak without stuttering. Of course, they all knew I stuttered. I just want you to all know that he doesn't stutter anymore. Pressure, pressure, pressure. Then he said, now we always begin with prayer, so Doug, would you offer the prayer? Oh, brother, I could have slugged him. I was just not ready for it. It was just so sudden-like and so quick. And this was quite a tipping point again. There's many tipping points in a lifetime. And I stood and was going to say this prayer, and I could just feel the speech block coming. And I knew that rather than to just fight it right then, what I ought to do is step back, and I just step back and say, well, listen, before I give the prayer, and I wanted to warm up. I want you all to know how excited I am to be back and to be amongst you. And I've really experienced a miracle, a wonderful miracle. And I'm glad to be back. And I talked a little bit, pointed a few guys out a little bit, good to see you, and so on, and et cetera, et cetera. And I just felt myself warming up until, bango, I was ready. Said the prayer. No problem. And so what I'm trying to explain is the process that I went through. It took time, a lot of time. And now, that's a miracle, what I went through. Now, in my patriarchal blessing, to quote one line from it, the Lord has been mindful of you, He has heard you, and He has healed you. The Lord didn't live my life for me. He directed me what I should do. And it was up to me to adapt and shift gears when common sense required. And it was a process, and it took years. But the whole point is I was on my way. Now, only story that I know of a absolute amazing miracle was Dr. Chase Peterson, the former president of the University of Utah. Perhaps Chase Peterson was as educated and as smart as any man in Utah's history. His father was the president of Utah State for nearly 30 years, so Chase grew up on the campus. Chase Peterson, when he got through his 8th grade, his parents had sent and applied for him to go to probably the most elite high school in the United States, which is in Massachusetts. And you have to be invited to go there. And by sending them the grades and everything, Chase didn't even know about this, that what came back that they had accepted him to enter into this, was called Middlesex School. Well, but then Chase had to make the decision. Do I want to go or don't I want to go? He decided that he wanted to go. But after several days of giving it some real deep thought, because he's going to have to say goodbye. And he's out of there. New friends and everything else. He gets to Middlesex, but Chase is one of these guys that is so basically personable and friendly. It's just there, just part of him. He's just so refined, such an amazing man. Now, the reason I'm telling you this story is because I met Chase Peterson at a birthday party. The birthday party was for Earl Holding, at the time Utah's wealthiest man. He had his 80th birthday, Earl did, and he invited all these people at the Grand America Hotel. And he had the Mormon Tabernacle Choir there. He had a orchestra there. It was amazing, and you were assigned seats. And so that when you came, there was someone there to take you to your assigned seat. So they had all these small round tables. And so when we arrived at our seat, there sat Chase Peterson and his wife Greta. So here's Carol and I, and we go through the introductions. And during the conversation, he asked me, "Well, now what are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I don't know whether you would want to know about me on to that extent." And I was hesitating. And he pressed me, "Oh, come on, please, tell me, what are you doing?" I said, "Well, to tell you the truth, I'm writing a book on how to overcome adult stuttering. And I was asked to do this by the University of California of Irvine." Well, Greta spoke up and said, "Did you know that Chase used to stutter?" And I said, "No, I didn't. I said, "This is amazing. Now tell me about your story, Chase." Well, Chase's story, I think was rather interesting, was that he started to stutter in the 10th grade in high school. Now, when he had come home from a Middlesex school, like over the holidays and that, he didn't want his parents to know that he had the problem. So he avoided the telephone at all costs. If he wanted to talk to somebody, he'd go to a local payphone, drop in the money, and make the phone call. He hid the impediment from the parents and others as much as possible, but he developed this stuttering. So it can come at various times, and it's amazing. Now, he gets a scholarship to go to Harvard when he graduates. Now, he graduates as one of the most popular kids in the school. They loved him, and he was the only Mormon in the school. And now he's in Harvard. He reaches his sophomore year, and he knows that he's defeated. He knows he'll never be able to amount to very much in this life if I cannot talk. And the impediment is getting worse and worse and worse as time goes on. So he's having to drop out of being able to do all kinds of things in the classroom. He can't do it because he stutters. So in desperation, as he told the story to Carol and I at that birthday party for Earl Holding, he says, I was forced to my knees, and I approached it on the basis of, I don't know if you have anything planned for me, Lord, but if you do, stuttering will be a most inefficient way for me to proceed in fulfilling my purpose in this life. And from that, he asked the Lord if he would bless him, and so that he could go forth stutter-free. The next morning, it was gone. Now, I don't know of any miracle like that, nor have I heard of a miracle like that. So there are those who receive that kind of a blessing. That was not my case. I had to work and earn it every inch of the way. But I was taught what it would take to do it. And so in that, I was blessed. But it was such a wonderful feeling of knowing that I could do about anything I wanted to do within reason, but my voice and my speech would not inhibit me. I could do it. And And so I moved forward. And I moved forward in a very aggressive way in my life. Well, here I am. I'm back. I'm going through the process of normality of speech, but in another tongue. And if I don't stay in that another tongue, I will have a setback. I'll have a relapse. I have to stay in that another tongue. Now, if I look back over my life, there are certain people, if they didn't exist, where would I be today? And I want to just reference a few of those people up to this point. One, of course, now this is excluding my grandparents and my parents and those that I have mentioned. But I got to just reemphasize that boxing coach, Walt McHargue. When I was a mission president in Alaska, I took 2 half days off. One, I wrote a letter to, which I talked about last time, to May Newber, my senior world history teacher, who really influenced me. And I remember sitting there listening to these kids ask questions and answer questions, and I just sat there like a bump on the log. But on the other hand, I doubt if any of those kids were any more touched than I was with May Newber and her teaching skills. Now we come down to the boxing coach, Walt McHargue. This guy was very serious. He knew the sport, and he insisted upon us abiding by his regulations. And because he wanted us to win those fights. And so when we stepped inside that ring, he wanted us to win. Not so much for the school or anything else, but for our own psyche, to know that we've been able to face somebody we've never seen before in our lives, and they're going to come out and try and kill us. And so that, and we go at them. So he wanted to bring us up to that level to be able to handle ourselves. And that included the techniques of boxing, but it also entailed, if not more so, just our own attitude to overcome, let's say, boxing fear, which is far different than stuttering fear. Stuttering fear is the worst, but boxing fear. But here I am in Alaska. Now, Walt McHargue died during his about his 45th, 6th, 7th year, something like that. Just after he left Idaho Falls, took a job in California coaching. And while at that job, when we were still young, he died. So I felt like I'd like to write him a letter, even though he's passed on. So I took 1 half day, and I wrote this letter. And I went through 3 drafts, the final draft. And I had it typed up. Now, I knew he was from Wendell, Idaho, initially, and I sent it to the postmaster in Wendell, Idaho. And with a little note on the envelope saying, if you can, find Walt McHargue's wife. And never heard back. But I felt good about just doing it, just expressing to him. Because I knew that if he's not here, he's there. And if he's there, at least he knows here is someone that still remembered him and was grateful for his contribution. Now, I can't tell you how important boxing was in terms of facing all kinds of situations in life. As I went through life, giving presentations, meeting the President of the United States, for example, Ronald Reagan, all the things that I have been involved in with all kinds of people, and to have that confidence that I can handle myself in those situations. And so much stemmed from the sport of boxing, and it just played a critical role. But I was fortunate enough to have Walt McHargue as my coach. But one that I have to also really mention, and that's Howard Thompson. Howard Thompson was the manager of the J.J. Newberry store that hired me to start painting the signs, the little tiny signs. And for some reason, he gave me the job. I had the job. I got the confidence that I can do this job, and I have a nice resume doing sign painting for J.J. Newberry's as a sophomore in high school. So Howard Thompson, later on in life, he left Newberry's, and but he kept in touch with my family, particularly my mother, and she would let him know what I'm doing and so on and so on. And then later on in life, we corresponded, and he passed on. But I don't know what I'd have done without Howard Thompson. The role was so critical in giving me confidence. Now, I started a sign company when I graduated from high school, and I had to have a place where I could work out of. And he heard about that I was trying to find a location. So he contacted me. He said, now listen, we have an extra space just off of our stock room, and there's a separate stairway. You can have this space free. For all the work you did for me, free, and for the store, I think that we owe you something. So I started off with Snarr Sign Company, and I painted a little sign on the second floor of the window. I had to get a ladder and get up there and paint Snarr Sign Company. And so he took this great interest in me. I'm grateful for Howard Thompson. But I learned how that you throw that bread out on the water while it comes back. And it sure came back in his case. So I just want to mention Howard Thompson to you. But there's another one is Glenn Turner, who was the professor at BYU that taught oil painting and watercolors. I knew nothing. I never even heard about watercolors. I just signed up for it. This developed, it just seemed to be a natural for me, was watercoloring. Watercoloring is a very unforgiving medium. It's a medium that is transparent, so you can't really paint over on top of each other, or the colors will turn to mud. And particularly, you cannot put a light color over a darker color. It will not work because the medium is transparent. So it is a medium that you have to wrestle with, and you have to get the hang of it, and it's very, very complex. And I can see him now with he had big hands, and this kind of a big guy, and with that little brush, and how he would demonstrate certain watercoloring techniques to us that he employed. And so I got to mention Glenn Turner. And I have done some painting in my life as I've gone through life, but I haven't painted for a number of years, and I'm really sorry for that. But I just can't imagine my life without Glenn Turner. Well, there's another person I'd like to mention who really had an impact on my life. This was later on, and this ties in with stuttering. There came to Salt Lake City a positive thinking rally. And this positive thinking rally, they did a lot of advertising on the radio and the newspaper, $10 a ticket. I bought 10 tickets. And I took my family. And I took my friend Alan Brown and his wife and a couple of his children so that we used up the full 10 tickets. Well, you had perhaps the best, what they called platform speakers in America. You had Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, for example. You had Zig Ziglar, for example. You had Dr. Robert Schuller that was very good at that, speaking. You had Ira Hayes. You had Art Linkletter. You had Earl Nightingale. And you had them. Well, during that rally, which was the way it worked, speaker would get up there and speak after being introduced, and he would go for about an hour. Then they'd break for 15 minutes. And then after that, they'd have the next speaker. So fundamentally, they'd start about noonish or 1 o'clock, thereabouts, and it'd go at about 10 o'clock at night by the time they're through, because you had to have these 15-minute or 20-minute, something like that, rest periods. People run the bathroom, but they could also buy product, books and tapes and things like that. So very, very inspiring, and I really got worked up. And I told Alan and my wife, you know, I think I can do as good as they can do. So I'd never given any speeches before, but I said, I think I can do as good as they can do. Yeah, I know they're professionals, but I still think I can do as good as they can do. And so at the end of the day, I ran down and met with the producers. Now, in this case, the producer was an insurance tycoon from Chicago. And he felt that the country needed to get a shot in the arm to build them up, to improve their salesmanship qualities, and then their positive thinking in particular. So it was a positive thinking rally. Well, I run down there, but I introduced myself, and I said, I want to get on this rally. So he turns me over to his second-hand guy, and of course they just laughed at me. We're not, you know, we have people, we probably had 100 people or more who've come to us since we started wanting to get on this rally. No, we're just not interested. We have our team, we feel comfortable with it, and that's it. So I was chopped off. But I refused to take no for an answer. I guess that goes back to my boxing days and my stuttering days. So I decided what I'd do is I want to have an introduction. You always got to have a proper introduction. I didn't have the introduction. We had people. It was so jammed with people that I don't think that you even heard a word I said. So I got a hold of Mr. Bischoff, who was in charge of the Republican Party here in the state of Utah. And I took him to lunch, because I want to get on this rally. And could you give me an introduction to Ronald Reagan? Brother. Now, Ronald Reagan, at that time, was on TV all the time and doing a commercial. And he said, well, he says, I can't guarantee I can get it, but I know who to contact on his staff. That's Michael Deaver. Michael Deaver is his chief of staff. Now, this was just before he became the governor of California. There was an interim period there. But he was famous already because of these ads on television. In those days, you only had three channels. So, you know, it's easy to have watched him. So it comes back that Michael Deaver will have lunch with you. And it was on Wilshire Boulevard, right down towards the end of the street, or the boulevard, I should say. So I fly on down. and introduce myself to Michael Deaver to take him to lunch. And I say, I'd like to get on this program with the positive thinking rallies, and I'm wondering if you could provide an introduction, and I'd like to tell you about myself. He said, well, it's interesting. He said, they've been trying to get Ronald Reagan on this program for quite a few months, so I know all the people well. So during the lunch, I gave him my history. He said, now, I think I can do this for you. But he says, I'm going to do it for a fee. And I don't think I've told this story here before. And how much? $20,000. Now, we're looking at $20,000 then. I don't know what it would be today. I'm convinced what he wanted to do was scare me off. But I figured something told me to do it. So I said, I'll do it. And he set the appointment up for me to meet with the rally producers. Now, what had happened was that two entrepreneurs had bought out the original owner. And these two entrepreneurs lived in Memphis, Tennessee. The rally that they were doing was at Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so that was where I was to meet them. And they'd meet with me following the rally. Now, they had set up headquarters in the Hilton Hotel there with all the rooms they needed and so on and so on. I remember distinctly how I felt. This rally was at the Oral Roberts University campus in their main auditorium. And it was jam-packed, just filled with people. Just amazing to me. So I was watching these speakers speak. All of a sudden, it wasn't the same as in Salt Lake City. These speakers were bigger. Man, they were really good. And I had just about front row seats, about 10 rows back, so I could really get the impact. And as each one would go through their talks, Doug, how can you ever think of matching those talks? Are you kidding yourself? I mean, let's get real. But I had the appointment, agreed to the money. I had to go through with it. I was stuck, and I knew I was over my head. Well, so afterwards, we meet in the Hilton Hotel. They had a nice big room, office complex there that they'd rented out. So I go through my introduction. But how I started off, that I had a series of articles on me. It appeared in Time magazine, for example, had 2 articles on me with a picture, Fortune magazine with the picture. I had the Reader's Digest, had a 6-page article on me. I had a series of articles in the Washington Post editorial page 3. I had a pile of articles. So that was my introduction, was to sling out those articles on me. So they knew I wasn't just some guy off the street wanting to get on this rally. But the owners, or 2 of them, they both said no. Same old story again, always no. Oh, brother, story of my life, hearing the word no. And they explained why, which is extremely logical. When we advertise, we have got to have a name that the people out there that look at these newspapers and that hear these radio ads and TV ads, that resonate with them. All you got to do is just have one name that resonates with, let's say, a certain person, and the curiosity is aroused, and we want to go hear that person. So if you get a stable of 8 speakers during the course of the event, you got eight names there that are well known. And that encourages the sellout, what they called to get butts on seats. That was their terminology. We got to get butts on the seats. And so we got to have names that people recognize. Well, who's ever heard of Doug Snarr, for example? Nobody. It doesn't make a bit of difference that you've had articles on you in all these magazines and everything else. That doesn't mean anything to us. It is still, you're not a recognized name. So you're out. Well, right behind them, and when I got thinking, you know what, I'm paying $20,000 for nothing. When they said, you're out, oh boy. So, I had to go for it. So then there's a guy behind them, and he was quiet. He didn't say anything. His name was Pat Gray. Now, Pat Gray said, I think we should go with Doug Snarr. Now, my argument was this. They might not know my name. I agree with that. You have all celebrities. That's not me. But you have something in your program that is missing. And that missing is that bite in the speech that testifies to people there listening to this rally and all these speakers. Gives them hope that they can change their life and they can run up against an insurmountable obstacle and to prevail over that obstacle. You don't have that. What you've got is speakers that tell stories about other people. And generally, if you're sitting there, you say to yourself, well, maybe so, but it sounds like to me that these stories are somewhat exaggerated. Now, can you tell me that these stories are not exaggerated to a certain degree, each one of them? And they concurred, well, you got a point there. What I will do is I'll give a testimonial of what it takes to overcome the impossible. That is the ingredient that is missing in this rally. So that when they leave, they feel their purposes have been fulfilled and complete. So that was my argument. Pat Gray said, he's right. I think we need him in this rally. Let's give him one chance. One chance. So then, there's John Handick and Sam Cooper were the two owners. But Pat Gray was the brains. He was the one that was responsible to get the butts on the seats. He created all the advertising. He created the slogans. He did all the buying the advertising for them. He was the brains of the outfit. They agreed. So then they said, Snarr, we'll give you 30 minutes at the rally in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is going to be 3 months from today, or thereabouts. We haven't set the exact date, but it'll be approximately 3 months. I said, no, I won't accept 30 minutes. You give me 1 hour, just like all the other big boys. I want 1 hour. And furthermore, I want to be right behind Paul Harvey. Boy, you're hard to deal with. I said, it'll be worth it. 1 hour behind Paul Harvey. And they finally concurred. Well, Mr. Snarr, let me ask you just one question. How many speeches have you actually given? And I said, well, boys, you got me there. None. I have given some little speeches in our little local church for maybe like 15, 20 minutes, maybe 30 at the most, but that's it. They were just shaking their heads, oh my gosh, what are we getting ourselves into? We've agreed to let him have an hour, and now he's never even... Do you have your speech written by any chance? No. I've got to write it yet. And so they were just, oh, this is impossible. I don't know how we ever get in this jam. I can just, their minds are going like that. Pat Gray just sat back there. There's something about him. He got to me. This guy was deep water. He was a man of real substance. But he understood the sophistries of advertising, and he could guess the people. and he was gifted at putting the butts on the seats, very, very much so. Now, to later describe him, our Linkletter told me, I've never, ever had an agent in my life. But if I were to have one person to be my agent, I'd choose Pat Gray of Kansas City. He's the smartest of them all. So I come home. Now, to write this speech, took me about 30 days. Now, I have sitting in front of me Janice Dixon, that I took this speech to, and she kind of helped clean it up a little bit, which I'm going to acknowledge that right now. So she made I knew who was really smart with Janice Dixon. Well, anyway, so 30 days to get it written. Now, I cannot read this speech. I cannot refer to it as notes. I got to give this speech as a part of me, as if I'm walking out on that platform in front of that audience. And when I give it, it's as if I'm just the first time it's ever been given. I memorize the speech. That's another 30 days, roughly. So then I start to practice downstairs in my house here. Didn't sound right. But one thing I knew for sure, everybody needs a coach. I mean, everybody has to have a coach, someone that you can turn to that can help you. If you're Magic Johnson, you got to have a coach. I don't care who it is, you got to have a coach. Larry Bird, you got to have a coach. You got to have a coach. So who is the best coach in public speaking? And I felt it was Dr. Royal Garf of the University of Utah. And I'd heard he had just retired. So I called him on the phone. I'd heard so many things about him through the years, how he had influenced so many of the students that he had taught, how to give presentations and stand up and talk and so on. So I call him and ask if I can meet with him. And he has a home up there right near the University of Utah, a very, very nice home, by the way. So I get in there and I tell him the story. I'm going to be giving this speech in about a month's time, and I need a coach, someone that can make sure that the deliverance and how I'm giving it, the timing, just how to hit these words. He said, now, hold on here. Now, you mean to tell me that you're on this rally with all these speakers? I said, yes. Are you telling me that this is the first speech you've ever given? I said, yes. Do you mean to tell me that you've never had a speech teacher teach you how to give an oratory speech? Yes. He said, it's not fair. It's not right. He hit the doggone desk. He said, I have devoted my life to be able to speak and to teach kids how to speak. And here I would give my left arm if I could be able to speak on that rally with those speakers. And here you are, have never even given one, and now you're asking me, the expert, to teach you how to do it. Is that right? And I said, that's why I'm here, because you're the best. And he leaned back and he just shook his head and he said, well, you know, I'll teach you how to give that speech. And so I got a key to our local ward house or local church, and we met. This was 5 nights a week. And I went up on the podium. It was empty. The place was empty. He's walking up and down the aisles. Carol was in the back with a copy of the speech to make sure that I get it right and to double check me. And so that became the team. I'll never forget the first time I started off to utter this speech to him. He said, stop. Where are you going? I said, well, what do you mean, where am I going? I'm just going to go to the next line. No, where are you going? And he just kept after me. He said, you started up here. You don't start up there. You start down here. And then you build as you go so that you end with a climax. You never start up here because then there's no place to go. You start down here. I'll never forget how he expressed that to me. Well, there's obviously that he was really into it. And I felt like not only was he wanting to help me, but in a sense, as true with most teachers, they have a way of putting themselves into your shoes. And so he was reliving his own future, let's say, aspiration through me. My voice has changed since I've gotten older, but he said, you know what, Doug? Your voice is different. And he says you cannot teach voice. You either have the voice or you don't have the voice. Okay. So anyway, he says, your voice is a little bit like, he said, Jimmy Stewart. Now, I never ever been able to imagine that, and to this day I don't. But the quality, he says, a little bit different, and therefore it sticks, it stands out. And he says, my voice is not as good as your voice. To penetrate and to be remembered. My voice is not a voice that you remember as much as your voice. So we built quite a relationship. So it was day after day, week after week, and boy, it's getting closer and closer. Now we come down to the night before I am to leave, the last time I'm going to practice this speech in the church house. And I get all through. And he says, jumps up. While he's walking, Doug, he says, I want to tell you something. You will be the most remembered, and you're going to give the best speech of anyone on that rally. I guarantee it. And Carol speaks up. Dr. Garf, he forgot one full page of notes. And I could not remember forgetting that page, but it was critical. It had to be in there to maintain that continuity and flow of the message that I hope to leave. So now I'm on the airplane. I arrive in North Carolina. They have a limousine to pick me up at the airport. Man, I couldn't believe this. And then they take me to the hotel. Well, that night, Pat Gray says, I want to take you and show you where you're going to be speaking. You're speaking in the Coliseum. We have a positive thinking day for the whole state of North Carolina, let alone the city of Charlotte, North Carolina. We're going to have the TV. Everything is going to be here. It's a total sellout. We have a complete sellout. He takes me to the Coliseum, and he had it timed. We walk in there, and the lights are off. And then finally, the lights go on. And he reached over there and he hit me like that in the back of his hand right here. Okay, Rocky. And then the music of Rocky I came on. And we're the only ones in the place. And if you've ever heard that music, how stirring it is in Rocky I. So he set me up well. Well, I get back to the hotel room. I can't sleep. I didn't undress. I wore the same, I came with one suit and one tie and one white shirt. And I just left it on. And I spent an evening, all night long, rehearsing that one page. That thing that bothered me, I was so terrified I'm going to forget that page. And then it got to where finally, my gosh sakes, it's getting closer and closer and closer. And so the next morning, I get a phone call, what do you want for breakfast? I said, I want 6 shrimps. They brought me 6 shrimps for breakfast. That was it. And then later on in the day, I get the phone call. Mr. Snarr, the limousine is there to take you to the rally. About that time, I'm thinking, what if I kind of all of a sudden go blank? I can't remember my next line. You just I got to get that out of my head. Don't even think about that. You can't think that. Don't get it out of your head. You can't have any negative thoughts. You got to be in total control here. Well, I hop in the limousine, and there sits Paul Harvey. He says, "I'm Paul Harvey." I said, "Well, I'm Doug Snarr." He says, "Well, Mr. Snarr, I understand that you're speaking right behind me." I said, "Yes." He says, "Well, Mr. Snarr, I got to tell you the truth. I apologize, but I've never heard of you." And I said, "Well, Mr. Harvey, nobody else has either." And so then he says, "Well, Mr. Snarr, how many speeches have you given?" I said, "Well, Mr. Harvey, this is my first speech." He says, "Nobody follows me, and it's their first speech." And I said, "Well, I guess I'm the exception. Can I ask you a question? It says here that you're from Salt Lake City. Is that true?" I said, "Yes." "Are you a Mormon?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Those Mormons surprise me every time." Well, I thought that was a great line, frankly. We get there. He gives his speech. I go into the dressing rooms, and I'm trying to rehearse again. I'm getting all up tense. And then the moment came that I was next. And I get out there. I'm introduced. And as I walked up on the platform, and there's the podium, the lights were on. I looked and I saw all those people, and then the lights went off, and I had to give the speech. I'd never rehearsed with the lights off. It was a total different experience for me. And there, for a moment there, I just had a certain hesitation. And then it unfolded, and it came. When the speech ended, the lights went back on. What happened was that the audience stood and charged the platform. And I was adjusting my eyes because it had been black while I was giving the speech. A speaker likes to look in the eyes of the people and get a feedback, but that was gone. So what happened was, I saw these policemen running, and they had ropes. Well, the audience attacked the platform where I was speaking, and the police were trying to hold them back. And they broke through and got to me. And all kinds of experiences I had, people crying and everything. One I remember was this: "My son stutters." And I had decided I was going to take him. The last moment I decided not to. "Where do you speak next?" Because wherever it is, I'm going to be there with my son who stutters. I said, I don't know. I only agreed to speak one time, and they only asked me to speak one time. But I do know that the next speech is at the Cow Palace in San Francisco. But I don't know whether I'll be there. He says, "Oh, don't worry, you'll be there. Because of all the speakers, you're by far the best." Well, I mentioned this to you about the years and years of practice. The dreaming while I was pulling the weeds from the potato rows. Maybe someday I could give a speech. And it was fulfilled in that moment. Well, they came up to me. "Doug, you're prime time. From now on, you're behind Paul Harvey. You're prime time." And I said, "Well, I can't speak prime time. 4 days ago, I got a call from my church to serve as a mission president, and I accepted that call. So I will not be on your program. I'll speak between now and the time I go," which ended up being 4 times. And then that will be probably the last that you'll see of me. or hear of me. And I just want you all to know how grateful I am for the miracles of Pat Gray. He died 3 months ago. Hurt deep. One man determined a great measure of my entire life. One man. In this case, Pat Gray. Thank you.